The October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on Israel left communities in the south devastated, significant portions of their population either dead or kidnapped, and in many instances, these kibbutz were burnt to the ground. One of the important conversations that is needed in the wake of October 7th is how these communities are rebuilt, how those who want to help can aid those communities, and the role that an eventual return of tourism can play in that rebuilding effort. Joining us now to discuss this is Gal Hana, Director for Canada with the Israeli Tourism Ministry. Gal, thank you very much for joining us on Forum Daily.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
The October 7th terrorist attack on Israel sent shockwaves throughout the world. I think it's important for us to discuss what is being done to rebuild the southern communities that were destroyed. Can you tell us what is in place so far to rebuild some of those communities?
So as you must know, the attack on October 7th caught us unguarded. And those communities, and we are speaking about tens of thousands of people that were evacuated from their houses, both in the south, but also in the north, where again, they went to hotels that were used to be for tourists, but were needed to shift and pivot to host those families free of charge, I must say. The hotel industry really recruited themselves to make those hotels friendly to the families, to kids. In hotels and all of those places, we saw kindergartens that were open. We just were announced of hotels that opened schools in their perimeters, and needless to say about psychology and therapy sessions that are taking place. Besides that, and the assistance of Israel and the state of Israel to those evacuees, Israel is really taking care of all of the wounded soldiers, the wounded families, and the wounded casualties that we had from those horrible attacks. And unfortunately, and I'm sure that the audience is familiar with that, Israel is a tiny country. You can't avoid knowing someone that was either evacuated, kidnapped, or had a family member that was killed throughout those brutal attacks. And the level of these atrocities was so insane that I think that no one could ever imagine something like that would take place in Israel.
You mentioned the hotel industry. Obviously, those are traditionally for tourism. Has the terrorist attack and the war against Hamas in response put a temporary pause on tourism in Israel?
Yes, I must say that it was, don't want to say disappointing, but we just started to recover from the COVID pandemic. Israel and travel from North America and Canada in specific came to the numbers of 2019, and actually we were on the trajectory to exceed the number of 2019. We saw numerous tourists that are coming happily to rejoin with the state of Israel, with the Holy Land, to again, after 3 years of unable to travel, and all of a sudden, everything so abruptly got stuck and stopped. Nowadays, when we are at the end of the year, hopefully going through a better year of 2024, we're now starting to see more and more airline companies announcing that they will resume flights early January 2024. In regards of Canada, we expect February to Air Canada to relaunch the route to Tel Aviv. So we are very anxious to get those tourists back to Israel. Needless to say that when we are speaking about those remote regions that were affected by the war, they are heavily dependent on travel and tourism. If we are speaking about the south, it's the Gaza envelope, and those settlements used to host numerous tourists all over the year. The weather in Israel is ideal throughout the year, and this is exactly the places that you are going to vacation, where in the north, exactly the same thing. People are going, especially in this time of year, in the last quarter of the year, to celebrate, to have good time with their families, with their friends, tourists that are coming to see a country, and all of that is stopped at one of the most happiest days in the Jewish calendar, the day of Simchat Torah, the day that the Jewish people celebrated, and one of the most significant holidays. And this is what hurt the most.
We have only about 20 seconds left. How many Canadians traditionally visit Israel on a yearly basis before the war?
100,000 tourists came in 2019, and we expect to have the same number at least in 2024.
Gal, before the break, you were talking about the expectations of the return of tourism to Israel. How do you rebuild travel confidence for those who do want to visit Israel?
So that's a good question that we are now working on as we build our work plans for the next year. We know that for sure that tourists and travelers rely heavily on influencers, on reporters that are coming to visit firsthand and to experience Israel. So we are working right now with the first groups of travelers to come to Israel to depict that themselves and to experience the state of Israel, wonderful experiences that we can have. We are sending them those journalists all across the country, including those regions that were affected by the war, again, emphasizing the significance of events. But eventually, and unfortunately, the state of Israel encountered those kind of events in the past. We know to recover the confidence quite quickly. In 2019, we had operations. In 2014, we had operations. Unfortunately, this is the neighborhood that we are living in. But once things are coming down, I must say that the Israel Defense Force, the Israeli police make sure and guarantee the safety of each traveler. And I will just finish with that. Even in 2019, in one of the operations, we had a huge group of Canadians that came to travel the country. I joined them. It was just when I started my position here. And despite the missiles that were shot on Tel Aviv, when we asked them whether or not they want to go back to their hotel rooms, they said that they felt completely confident and safe, regardless to those elements, because of the Iron Dome and some other technological developments that we have.
And you bring up the Iron Dome. That's a very important conversation piece here, because I think we know that Hamas has fired over 10,000 rockets at Israel since the start of the war. They had fired rockets at Israel prior to the war. How much is the Iron Dome important here, not just to the safety and security of Israeli citizens, but also, obviously, those who are visiting?
So Iron Dome gives a huge and significant protection out of those missiles, and in many ways it's changed the equation in many regards. So we weren't affected by those too much. However, there are some downsides that we started to develop this immunity towards those missiles attack, and some claim that this is why those missiles started to become more and more common. Nowadays, we know that those missiles and those attacks cannot be tolerated, even with the Iron Dome protection. Mm-hmm. It's a huge technological advantage and quantum leap forward, but we can't rely on those defense technologies when we saw those attack movements by a terror organization in such an horrific way.
I want to ask you about maybe those in Canada who don't have a high opinion of Israel. We've seen a lot of protests across the country against Israel's war against Hamas, and we've seen some loaded words thrown around, like Israel is an apartheid state. What do those protesters have wrong in regards to what it's actually like to live in Israel? And I ask that especially in the context of the nearly 2 million Arab citizens of Israel.
I must say, and again, I think that we saw that in surveys throughout the world, but in Canada also, that the anti-Semitism is rising to new peaks. And it's very concerning, especially when it's an undebatable event that took place on October 7th. It's not another operation. It's not a debatable event that took place. We saw the most, I think, horrific events ever recorded in history. And we know that because it was literally recorded. We have a 47 minutes video that shows horrific scenes, that something that you can't even imagine in a horror movie. Yeah. And all of those took place in a country that literally seeks for peace. The only thing that what Israel is looking for is some sanity. I'm reminding that prior to October 7th, Israel was on the verge of signing another historical agreement with Saudi Arabia. Israel was, after 3 years of one after the other of significant normalization processes throughout the region to make the Middle East a much more significant economical powerhouse as much as it should be. Regardless to that, we have 2 million Arab citizens that now, even throughout the war, are fully support the state of Israel, support the soldiers. Some of them are serving as equal parts in the IDF,